The $12,000 Vera Wang gown I swiped for last week wasn't the most expensive item at this wedding. My silence was when my sister demanded I stay out of photos to avoid outshining her. I didn't cry. I just sipped my red wine and realized that if they want me to disappear, I will vanish along with the entire financial foundation they are standing on. They wanted a fairy tale, but I am giving them a nightmare. My name is Hazel Winfield. I am 32 years old, and on most days, I am the director of strategy at Sterling & Thorne, a consultancy firm that shapes the skylines of economies and the futures of Fortune 500 companies. My office is a glass box suspended 40 floors above the concrete grid of Boston, a sanctuary of climate-controlled silence and minimalist Italian furniture. Here, I am the architect of solutions. I take chaotic, bleeding ledgers and discipline them into profitable lines of code and strategy. I am respected. I am afraid. I am impeccable. But outside these glass walls, to the people who share my DNA, I am simply the wallet. The Azure Cliffs Estate in Newport is one of those venues that smells of old money, hydrangeas, and salt spray. It is the kind of place where the grass is manicured with scissors and the air feels thinner, more exclusive. This was where my younger sister, Bianca, had decided she would become a wife. It was a fantasy location for a fantasy life, and like every other fantasy Bianca had ever entertained since she was 6 years old, I was the one paying for the production costs. I sat at my mahogany desk, the city lights beginning to flicker on in the twilight outside, and stared at the spreadsheet on my laptop screen. The numbers were stark, unyielding, and aggressively high. $85,000. That was the running total I had wired over the last 6 months. It covered the deposit for the estate. The imported orchids, which Bianca insisted had to be white with a specific hint of violent violence in the center. The catering down payment, and the symphony orchestra. Yes, a symphony orchestra. Not a DJ, not a band, but a 20-piece ensemble, because Bianca wanted to walk down the aisle to a live rendition of Debussy that would make people weep. It is her big day. Hazel. My mother, Meredith, had told me over the phone last week, her voice dripping with that specific brand of maternal guilt that only worked on the eldest daughter. You know how sensitive she is. You have done so well for yourself. It is only right that you help your sister have the start in life you did not need. I did not need it because I worked for it. I worked 80-hour weeks while Bianca was flunking out of art school and finding herself in Europe on Dad's credit card. But I did not say that. I never said that. I just authorized the wire transfer. The tension, however, had been building long before the checks cleared. It crystallized 3 days ago at the bridal salon in Back Bay. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion. The final fitting. Bianca had chosen a custom gown, a confection of lace and tulle that cost more than my first car. I was there to pay the balance and, theoretically, to find a bridesmaid dress. The salon was a temple of hushed whispers and champagne flutes, the kind of place where price tags were considered vulgar and never displayed. "Try this one, Hazel," the stylist had said, handing me a slip of midnight blue silk. "It is simple, structural, it suits your frame." I hesitated. My role was to fade into the background. I was the financier, the producer, not the talent, but the dress I was wearing. A stiff business suit felt like armor I needed to shed for just a moment. I stepped into the changing room. When I stepped out, the silence in the room changed frequency. The dress was modest. It had long sleeves and a high neck, but the cut was severe and elegant. It draped over my body like liquid night, accentuating the discipline of my posture, the sharp line of my jaw, and the confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. I stood on the pedestal, and for a second, I looked at myself in the trifold mirror and liked what I saw. I looked powerful. Then, I heard the gasp. It wasn't a gasp of admiration. It was the sharp intake of breath that precedes a hurricane. Bianca was standing on the opposite pedestal, drowning in layers of white ruffles that seemed to swallow her small frame. She looked at me, her eyes widening, her face flushing a blotchy, angry red. "Take it off," she whispered. "Excuse me?" I asked, turning to face her. "I said take it off." Her voice rose to a shriek, cracking the polite atmosphere of the salon. "Look at you. You are doing this on purpose. You always do this." "Bianca, it is just a dress. The stylist handed it to me," I said, keeping my voice level, the same tone I used to de-escalate boardroom hostile takeovers. "You look like you are trying to be the queen," she screamed, tears instantly springing to her eyes. She turned to our mother, who was sitting on a velvet settee, sipping complimentary Prosecco. "Mom, look at her. She is trying to outshine me. She is going to ruin my photos. Everyone is going to look at Hazel and talk about how skinny and rich she is, and I will just be the invisible girl in the white dress." I waited for my mother to become an adult. I waited for her to say, "Bianca, do not be ridiculous. Your sister looks lovely, and you are the bride." Instead, Meredith Winfield set down her glass and sighed, a long, suffering sound that placed the burden of the room's discomfort squarely on my shoulders. She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was light, but the pressure was there. "Hazel, honey," she said softly, "you know how insecure your sister gets. She is under so much pressure." "I am not the one screaming in a public place, Mother," I replied. No. But you are intense," she said, searching for a word that wouldn't sound like an insult, but felt like one anyway. "That dress is too commanding. It draws the eye. We need something softer for you. Something that lets Bianca be the star." She turned to the stylist, who looked ready to dive behind the reception desk. "Do you have anything in a nice, muted gray ash gray, perhaps, or a pale beige, something with less structure?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Ash gray. She wanted to dress me like a shadow. She wanted to drape me in the color of dust so that Bianca could sparkle. I looked at Bianca, who was now sniffling triumphantly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Then I looked at the mirror one last time. The woman in the midnight blue dress looked like she could buy this building. The woman they wanted me to be was a servant. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like bile. "Get the gray." I paid for Bianca's $12,000 dress. I paid for my own hideous gray sack that cost $600, but looked like it came from a discount bin. And I paid for the champagne they drank to celebrate the crisis being averted. And then there was Julian. Julian, Bianca's fiancé, had been sitting in the corner of the salon, ostensibly scrolling through his phone but actually watching the entire performance. Julian was 34, handsome in a catalog model sort of way, perfect teeth, perfect hair, and absolutely no substance behind the eyes. He worked in sales, though I had never quite figured out what he sold, other than his own charm. When I came out of the dressing room in the gray dress, looking washed out and diminished, I caught his eye in the mirror. He wasn't looking at Bianca. He was looking at me, and his expression was a cocktail of emotions that made my skin crawl. There was mockery there. Certainly he enjoyed seeing the high and mighty Hazel Winfield humbled, but there was also something else, a greedy, hungry look. He looked at me the way a man looks at a vault he wishes he knew the combination to. Later, as we were leaving, he held the door for me. "Generous of you, Hazel," he murmured, his voice low enough that Bianca, who was walking ahead with Mom, couldn't hear. "Taking the hit for the team. You really are the perfect big sister." "I just want Bianca to be happy," I said, clutching my purse, checking the time. I had a conference call in 40 minutes. "Of course," he smirked. "And we all know who makes happiness possible in this family. It must be lonely at the top, though all that money and only a gray dress to show for it." He winked and walked away, slipping his arm around Bianca's waist. I wanted to sanitize the space he had just occupied. Julian was a parasite, but he was the parasite my sister had chosen, and therefore I was financing his host. That was 3 days ago. Now, sitting in my office, the city below me dissolving into a grid of amber and white lights, my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was a notification from my bank. Alert credit utilization on American Express Platinum ending in 4009 has reached 95% of the limit. I frowned. My limit on that card was astronomical. It was the card I had given to the wedding planner, intended only for the final catering installments and the venue security deposit. I unlocked my phone and opened the app. The transaction history scrolled past my eyes, a waterfall of excess. The Gilded Lily Florist. Additional charge. $4,500. Lux Limo Service. $2,000. Vintage Wine Imports. $8,000. $8,000 for wine. We had agreed on the standard house selection. I tapped on the details. Upgrade to the Grand Cru Classe A package. I felt a vein in my temple throb. They hadn't even asked me. Bianca, or perhaps Julian, or maybe even my mother, had simply authorized the upgrade. Assuming the card would go through. Assuming the ATM would spit out the cash without a receipt. They were maxing out my credit line on wine that I probably wouldn't even get to drink because I would be too busy managing guests or fixing the hem of Bianca's dress. I closed the banking app and set the phone down. Face down, as if that could silence the reality of it. The office was quiet. The cleaning crew would not come for another 2 hours. I was alone with the hum of the server room and the distant wail of a siren 10 blocks away. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small framed photograph. It was an old picture, taken almost 20 years ago. It was a summer day at Cape Cod, before we lost the beach house, before Dad made the bad investments that I eventually had to clean up. In the photo, I was 12, lanky and awkward, holding a 2-year-old Bianca on my hip. She was laughing, her hands sticky with ice cream, grabbing at my hair. I was looking at her with such fierce protectiveness, such absolute adoration. My parents were in the background, out of focus, drinking cocktails on the porch. Even then, I was the one holding her. Even then, I was the one carrying the weight. I am doing this for you. B, I whispered to the empty room, using the nickname she hadn't let me call her in 5 years. But as I looked at the smiling toddler in the photo, I couldn't find the sister I was supposed to be saving. I only saw a consumer, a bottomless pit of need that had grown teeth. I had spent my entire adult life building a fortress of security. I had sacrificed relationships, sleep, and joy to ensure that the Winfield name didn't end in bankruptcy court. I had bought them their dignity back, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, and their gratitude was to demand I wear gray so I wouldn't distract from their shine. I took a sip of the cold coffee sitting on my desk. It was bitter. The wedding was 2 weeks away. The bills were paid. The dress was bought. I was going to play my part. I was going to be the good sister, the silent financier, the background character in the ash-gray dress. I put the photo back in the drawer and slid it shut. The sound was sharp, final, like the closing of a vault. I didn't know it then, but the limit on my credit card wasn't the only thing that had been reached tonight. There is a breaking point in every structure, no matter how well architected. And as I stared at my reflection in the dark window, a woman in a power suit who felt powerless in her own family, I wondered if the collapse had already begun. The notification arrived at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. It was a sterile, automated ping that slid into the upper right corner of my monitor. Burying itself between a market analysis report from London and a compliance update from HR, I almost dismissed it. It was from WedPlan Pro, the premium wedding management application I had subscribed to 6 months ago. I had paid the $300 annual fee for the Platinum tier account, which allowed for unlimited guest management, budget tracking, and vendor integration. It was the digital command center for Bianca's wedding, and I was the commander-in-chief. System alert user permissions updated. I clicked the notification, expecting a routine update about a vendor confirming a delivery time. Instead, a dialog box opened in the center of my screen, the font cheerful and rounded, completely at odds with the text it displayed. Administrator Hazel Winfield has been downgraded to guest. I blinked. My fingers hovered over the mouse. Downgraded. That was impossible. I was the account owner. I was the one whose credit card was tied to the auto-renewal. Before I could even process the logic of it, a second notification popped up, overlapping the first. Guest Hazel Winfield has been removed from the event Bianca and Julian's Fairy Tale. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the leather creaking softly in the silence of my office. It had to be a glitch. WedPlan Pro was known for its robust interface, but no software was immune to bugs. I refreshed the page, the dashboard, which usually displayed the countdown clock 14 days, 6 hours, and 12 minutes was gone. In its place was a blank screen with a generic message, "You do not have access to any current events. Create a new event today." I picked up my phone and dialed Bianca. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you have reached the future Mrs. Julian Thorne. I am too busy planning the best day of my life to talk right now, so leave a message." I hung up and dialed again, voicemail. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. It was the same sensation I got when a client started avoiding my calls right before they defaulted on a contract. I navigated to my contacts and pressed the speed dial for my mother. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hazel, is everything okay?" Her voice was tight, high-pitched. It was her lying voice, the same tone she used when she told my father she hadn't bought any new jewelry while hiding the Cartier bag behind the sofa. "Mom, something is wrong with the wedding app," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just got kicked out of the system. I think the server crashed or someone pressed the wrong button. Can you tell Bianca to check her admin settings? I need to approve the final seating chart for the reception dinner today." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that stretched over the line, filled only by the sound of my mother's nervous breathing. "Mom." "It wasn't a glitch, Hazel," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you mean?" "We talked about it," she stammered. "Bianca, Julian, and we decided that maybe it is best if the wedding is a bit more private." "Private," I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. "There are 200 guests invited. The governor of Rhode Island is on the guest list. How is that private?" "We mean intimate in terms of family dynamics," she said, stumbling over the rehearsed lines. "You know how Bianca gets it. She feels a lot of pressure when you are around. You are so perfect, Hazel. You manage everything. You control everything." "I am paying for everything," I cut in, my voice losing its professional veneer. "That usually requires some level of management." "And that is exactly the problem." Meredith's voice rose, gaining a defensive edge. "You hold it over her head. You don't mean to, but you do. Just by being there, you cast a long shadow. Hazel, we just want Bianca to have her day in the sun without worrying about whether she is measuring up to you." "So you are uninviting me?" I asked, the absurdity of it making me want to laugh. "You are uninviting the person who paid for the venue, the food, and the dress, 2 weeks before the ceremony." "It is not uninviting," she said weakly. "We just think maybe you could skip the ceremony and the reception, just for Bianca's mental health. We will send you the video. It will be better this way. Less stress for everyone." "Mom, I paid $85,000. And we appreciate it, Hazel. We really do, but money isn't everything. Family is about feelings. Please, just be a bigger person. Don't make this difficult." She hung up. I stared at the phone screen, the call duration reading 2 minutes and 14 seconds. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, but the blow hadn't landed yet. I was still in the shock phase, where the brain refuses to accept the data it is receiving because the data is too illogical. Then the text message arrived. It was from Bianca. It was a block of text so long I had to scroll to read it all. "Hazel, Mom told me she spoke to you. Please don't be mad. Julian and I have been doing a lot of soul-searching, and we realized that having you there would just bring weird energy. You are too successful, too beautiful, and your friends are too fancy. I don't want people whispering and comparing us on my day. I want to be the only one they look at. I know you love me, so please understand. Let's consider your funding of the wedding as your final gift to me, a way to launch me into my new life. It is the most generous thing you could do. Love you." I read it twice, then a third time. "Too successful, too beautiful." She was weaponizing my achievements to justify erasing me. She wasn't just asking me to step aside, she was asking me to cease to exist, while leaving my wallet behind on the table. Consider your funding as a final gift. The entitlement was so pure, so unadulterated, it was almost breathtaking. My shock evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't about insecurity. Insecurity cries in the dressing room. This was something else. This was a coup. I placed the phone face down on the desk. I turned back to my computer. I opened my secure cloud storage. I didn't go to the wedding folder. I went to the folder labeled Legal and Financial, Personal. I pulled up the PDFs, one by one. I opened the contracts. The Azure Cliffs Estate. Rental Agreement. I scrolled to the bottom. There, in digital ink, was the signature Hazel Winfield. Clause 4. The client of record Hazel Winfield retains sole authority over all event details, access, and cancellations. Sterling Catering Services, Client Hazel Winfield. Luminous Event Lighting and Sound, Client Hazel Winfield. My name was everywhere. I wasn't just a donor, I was the legal owner of the event. They were treating me like a guest they could strike from the list, forgetting that I was the landlord of their entire fantasy. But why now? Why 2 weeks before? If they wanted me gone, why not do it months ago? Why wait until the checks were cashed, the deposits non-refundable, and the invitations sent? I needed to know what they were really saying, not the sanitized, mental health version they were feeding me, but the truth. I opened a new tab and logged into Facebook. I rarely used it. My social media presence was curated for LinkedIn, but I had a secret weapon. 3 years ago, I had helped a distant cousin, Sarah, get an internship at a marketing firm in Chicago. Sarah was the black sheep of the extended family, too honest, too piercing, and she hated the Winfield pretension as much as I tolerated it. We weren't close, but I knew she owed me. I sent her a message on Messenger. Hazel, Sarah, I need a favor. I know there is a family group chat or a private page for the wedding. I need to see it. The response came 3 minutes later. Sarah, I was wondering when you would ask. It is brutal. Hazel, you don't want to see it. Hazel, send it. Now. Sarah, I can't add you. They will see, but I will give you my login. Don't post anything. She sent the credentials. I logged out of my account and logged in as Sarah. I navigated to the Groups tab. There it was, a hidden group with 42 members. Bianca's Big Day, the real inner circle. I clicked on it. The feed was a cesspool. It wasn't just wedding planning. It was a dedicated forum for dissecting me. There was a post from Julian, dated 2 days ago. Finally got the approval on the wine upgrade. The Dragon Lady paid for it without blinking. We are drinking the good stuff. Boys. There was a comment from an aunt I hadn't seen in 5 years. Is she actually coming? I don't want to have to listen to her brag about her promotion all night. And then, I found the thread from this morning. Bianca had posted, "Update the witch is out. Mom and I finally pulled the trigger. Wed plan access revoked. She is gone." The comments were a stream of celebratory emojis and Yas Queen gifs, but it was the comment from my mother, Meredith Winfield, that made the room stop spinning and freeze into absolute stillness. Meredith Winfield. Don't worry about her reaction. I know Hazel. She is too proud to make a scene. She would die before she let anyone see her lose composure. We will just let her pay the final installment for the flowers tomorrow. I told the florist to invoice her early, and then on the day of, we will have security block her at the gate if she tries to show up. We will tell the guests she had an emergency business trip to Tokyo. She will play along to save face. She always does. I stared at the words. She will play along to save face. It wasn't just greed. It was a calculated exploitation of my character. They knew I valued dignity. They knew I loathed public displays of emotion. They were banking on my own strength to silence me. They were using my discipline as a leash to choke me with. I scrolled up. There was more. Julian. And once the wedding is over, we don't need to pretend to like her anymore. We can just cut contact. We will have the photos, the gifts, and the honeymoon paid for. She can go back to her glass tower and rot. I felt a physical sensation in my chest, a cracking sound, like a rib snapping under pressure. This wasn't an impulsive decision made by a stressed-out bride. This was a heist, a long con. They had planned this for months. They had extracted $85,000 from me, smiling in my face, eating dinners I paid for, all while plotting the exact moment they would discard me. They viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be mined until depletion. I looked at the timestamp on the florist invoice mentioned in my mother's comment. It was scheduled to hit my account tomorrow morning. $15,000 for imported Dutch tulips. I leaned back in my chair. The office was dark now, the only light coming from the glow of the monitor illuminating the hateful words of the people I had spent my life trying to please. They were right about one thing. I was proud. I was disciplined. But they were wrong about the rest. They thought my silence was a weakness. They thought my dignity was a shackle. They had forgotten that the person who builds the structure knows exactly where the load-bearing beams are. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to scream at the gate. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a crazy sister story to tell their guests. I closed the browser tab. I logged out of Sarah's account. I picked up my phone and opened my calendar. I cleared my schedule for the next 2 days. "Mark," I said to my assistant via the intercom, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly level. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow and Thursday. I have some personal legal matters to attend to." "Everything okay, Ms. Winfield?" Mark asked. "Everything is clarifying, Mark," I replied. "Everything is perfectly clear." I looked at the city lights one last time. They wanted me to be a ghost fine. I would be a ghost. But they forgot that ghosts are the ones who haunt the living, and I was about to become the most expensive haunting in New England history. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the picture frame. I simply opened my banking app, found the pending authorization for the florist, and stared at it. The glitch wasn't in the software. The glitch was in my assumption that blood meant loyalty. That glitch had been patched. System reboot initiating. I reached for my legal pad and a fountain pen. It was time to draft a new plan, one where the architect of dreams became the demolition expert. The most dangerous sound in the world is not the scream of a banshee or the roar of a cannon. It is the absolute, vacuum-sealed silence of a strategist who has stopped negotiating. I did not throw my phone against the wall. I did not weep into a pillow. I did not drive to my parents' house to bang on the door and demand an explanation for why my love was being repaid with exclusion. Instead, I engaged the same protocol I used when a hostile takeover target tried to bury bad assets in a quarterly report. I went dark. I powered down my phone. I set my out-of-office auto-reply at Sterling and Thorne to a generic message citing urgent personal legal matters. Then, I walked out of my glass tower, hailed a car, and went straight to the offices of Vance, Miller, and O'Keefe. Marcus Vance has been my personal attorney for 7 years. He is a man who views emotions as inefficiencies and contracts as holy scripture. When I sat in his leather wingback chair and laid the printed screenshots, the wed plan notification, and the stack of vendor agreements on his desk, he didn't offer me a tissue. He offered me a highlighter. "It is straightforward, Hazel," Marcus said, his voice dry as parchment. He tapped the document from the Azure Cliffs estate. "Legally speaking, this is not a wedding. A wedding is a religious or civil ceremony. What you have purchased here is an event, a production, and according to the client of record clauses in every single one of these contracts, catering, venue, floral, security, you are the producer." He leaned back, tenting his fingers. "You have the unilateral power to modify, postpone, or cancel any service without the consent of the beneficiaries. In the eyes of the law, Bianca and Julian are merely the talent attached to the production, and as any good producer knows, the talent is replaceable. The financing is not." "And the funds have already been transferred?" I asked. "Recoverable in part, depending on the cancellation windows," Marcus replied. "But the liability for the remaining balances. That is the interesting part. If you withdraw your sponsorship, the liability shifts to the secondary signatories. or in the absence of one, the event simply ceases to be funded. If services are rendered without payment, that becomes theft of services. I don't want to just cancel, Marcus, I said, my voice steady. I want to execute a controlled demolition. Marcus smiled, a rare expression that looked like a crack in a frozen lake. Then we document everything, every unauthorized charge, every breach of verbal agreement. We build a case not for emotional damages, but for financial fraud. It makes the retaliation legally bulletproof. I left his office with a clear directive. The next 48 hours were not for grieving, they were for auditing. While I was dissecting the anatomy of their betrayal, my family interpreted my radio silence as submission. To them, I was Hazel the doormat. Hazel, who would surely be hurt, perhaps a little sulky, but who would ultimately roll over and write the checks because she was desperate for their approval. They believed they had successfully bullied me into the shadows. It was almost insulting how predictable they were. On Wednesday morning, I turned my phone back on for exactly 5 minutes. A barrage of notifications flooded in, but one stood out. It was from Julian. Hey Hazel, assuming you are cool with everything since you went quiet, just a heads up. The symphony orchestra is nagging for the final $15,000. They need it by Friday to lock in the playlist. Can you wire it today? Thanks. The audacity was breathtaking. He had just conspired to ban me from the event, yet he was casually demanding $15,000 as if he were asking me to pick up milk. He didn't even pretend to be apologetic. He assumed the ATM was still operational. I typed my reply with surgical precision. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to believe the money was flowing so they would keep digging their hole deeper. Hazel noted, processing. 2 words, ambiguous enough to be interpreted as compliance, vague enough to hold no legal promise of payment. Julian, awesome. You're the best. I stared at the screen. You are the best. The manipulation was so clumsy it was almost pitiful. I took a screenshot of the exchange and added it to the digital folder labeled Evidence. Then, I went to work on the invoices. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by paper. I cross-referenced every credit card charge with the original budget I had approved 6 months ago. That was when I found the wine. I had approved a budget for the gold-tier beverage package premium liquors, craft beers, and a very respectable selection of wines averaging $50 a bottle. It was generous by any standard. But looking at the ledger from the distributor, the numbers didn't add up. The total charge was nearly $12,000 higher than the estimate. I pulled the itemized invoice. Item: Chateau Margaux, 2015, quantity 24 bottles. Unit price, $500. My blood ran cold. $500 a bottle. They had ordered Grand Cru Classé for a wedding where half the guests drank beer. I called the distributor, putting on my most professional administrative assistant voice. Hi. This is the accounting department for the Winfield event. I am looking at an invoice for 24 bottles of Chateau Margaux. I don't see the authorization signature for this upgrade. Oh, let me check, the sales rep said, typing in the background. Yes, here it is. We spoke to the bride, Ms. Bianca Winfield, on the 14th. She stated that her sister, the account holder, had given verbal approval for the upgrade as a special surprise for the groom. She told us to just put it on the card on file. I see, I said, my pen digging into the paper. So there is no written authorization from Hazel Winfield? No, just the verbal confirmation from the bride. Is there a problem? No problem at all, I lied smoothly. Just updating our records. Thank you. I hung up. It wasn't just greed. It was a fraud. Bianca had impersonated my authority to steal $12,000 from me. She had looked a vendor in the eye and lied. Knowing I would just pay the bill without looking at the line items, she banked on my busyness. She banked on my trust. I added the recording of the call to the folder. By Thursday afternoon, I had enough evidence to sue them in civil court. But a lawsuit is a long, boring process. I wanted something more immediate. I wanted a visceral correction of the universe. I drove to Newport. The Azure Cliffs estate was stunning. I had to admit, The late afternoon sun hit the limestone manor, turning it a soft, buttery gold. The Atlantic Ocean crashed against the cliffs below, a relentless, rhythmic violence that matched the beating of my heart. I walked into the main office. The receptionist looked up, startled to see me. "Ms. Winfield, we weren't expecting you. Is Bianca with you?" "No," I said, bypassing the pleasantries. "I am here to see Richard. Is he in—" Richard Sterling, no relation to my firm, was the general manager of the estate. We had met 5 years ago at a charity gala I organized. He was a man of the old-school impeccable suits, a firm handshake, and a deep respect for the bottom line. He liked me because I paid on time, and I never made unreasonable demands. Unlike my sister. He emerged from his office, a smile widening on his face. "Hazel, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Salkite walk through. "Something like that. Richard," I said, "can we talk in private?" He sensed the shift in my tone. The smile didn't drop, but it stiffened. He ushered me into his office and closed the heavy oak door. "What is wrong?" he asked, sitting behind his desk. "Is it the menu, the lighting?" "The contract," I said. I didn't sit down. I stood by the window, looking out at the lawn where the white tent was being erected. My tent. "Richard, I need you to be honest with me. How has my family been treating your staff?" Richard hesitated. He was a professional. He didn't gossip about clients, but he also knew me. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Hazel, you know I value your business, but it has been challenging. Your sister changes her mind 3 times a day. Your mother yelled at my head chef yesterday because the napkins were the wrong shade of white. And the groom, well, treats the waitstaff like furniture. If it weren't for your signature on the check, I would have fired them as clients months ago." "Good," I said, turning to face him. "Because I need you to know something. They have fired me." Richard looked confused. "I don't understand." "They have uninvited me. Richard, 2 days ago, they kicked me out of the planning app and told me my presence would ruin the aesthetic. They want my money, but they don't want me." Richard's jaw actually dropped. In the hospitality industry, you see everything, but this was a special kind of cruelty. "You are joking. You paid for the slate roof on this building with your deposit alone." "I am not joking. And here's the situation. I am not going to cancel today. If I cancel today, they have time to scramble. They might find a cheaper venue, or beg a loan from a bank, or spin a story that I am the villain who ruined their wedding out of spite." I walked over to his desk and placed my hands flat on the polished wood. "I want the show to go on. Richard, I want the setup to continue. I want the food prepared. I want them to believe everything is perfect, until the very last second." Richard looked at me, his eyes narrowing. He was a businessman, but he was also a human being who had been yelled at by my mother for 6 months. I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. "The contract is with you. Hazel," he said slowly. "Clause 14. The signer retains all rights to service delivery." "Exactly," I said. "I am not asking you to break a contract. I am asking you to enforce it, strictly, if the signer is not present. And if the signer withdraws funding due to a breach of the guest conduct policy, which I am sure my family has violated with their abusive behavior toward your staff, then what happens?" "Then services are suspended immediately," Richard said, a small, cold smile touching his lips, "and full payment is demanded from the remaining parties on site before the event can proceed. And if they cannot pay, then we evict them, and we call the authorities for theft of services." "They cannot pay." "Richard," I said softly, "Julian has maxed out his credit cards on a bachelor trip to Vegas. My parents are leveraged to the hilt on their mortgage. Without me, they are destitute." Richard nodded. He stood up and extended his hand. It wasn't the handshake of a vendor and a client. It was the handshake of 2 generals agreeing on a battle plan. "I will have the security team on standby," Richard said, "and I will make sure the invoice is printed and ready. Do you want to be there?" "No," I said. "I have a flight to catch, but I will be watching. You have cameras in the ballroom, don't you?" "High definition," Richard confirmed. I will give you the remote access code. Perfect. I walked out of the Azure Cliffs estate feeling lighter than I had in years. The air tasted of salt and impending justice. I checked my phone. Another text from my mother. Meredith Hazel. Did you pay the florist? She is calling me. I didn't reply. I got into my car and drove away. The storm was gathering, dark and heavy on the horizon. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the rain. I was the one bringing the thunder. And unlike the erratic, emotional storms my sister created, this one would be precise, calculated, and absolutely devastating. I had the law, I had the money, and now I had the venue. The trap was set. All that was left to do was wait for the mouse to take the cheese. 7 days, that is the biblical amount of time required to create a world. And as it turns out, it is also the exact amount of time required to meticulously dismantle one. I started the week by sending flowers. It was a strategic move, a piece of theater designed to lower their defenses. I ordered a massive arrangement of white lilies and orchids to be delivered to my parents' house, the staging ground for the pre-wedding chaos. The card attached was typed in an elegant script, counting down the days, wishing you all a beautiful final week of preparations. Love, Hazel. It was the kind of passive warmth they expected from me. The dutiful daughter, the one who swallows insults like vitamins and smiles through the indigestion. I knew exactly what they would do when they received it. They would smirk. They would tell each other that I had accepted my demotion, that I was trying to buy my way back into their good graces, or perhaps that I was just too stupid to realize I was being fleeced. I sat in my penthouse on Tuesday night, the air conditioner humming a low, artificial note. My apartment was a sanctuary of silence, a stark contrast to the scene playing out on the 65-inch screen of my television. I had cast the video from my phone. It was a live stream from Instagram, courtesy of one of Bianca's bridesmaids, a girl named Tiffany, who had more lip filler than brain cells. The caption read, "Last fling before the ring hashtag, bye bye basic, hashtag rich girl era." They were at a private club in downtown Boston, a venue I knew well because my firm represented the ownership group. The tables were littered with empty bottles of Dom Perignon bottles I had undoubtedly paid for via the miscellaneous entertainment fund I had transferred 2 weeks ago. The camera shook as Tiffany panned across the room. The music was loud, a thumping bass line that vibrated the speakers, and there was Bianca. My sister was standing on a velvet banquette, holding a magnum of champagne. She was wearing a white sequined mini dress and a tiara that looked plastic but probably cost $500. She looked euphoric. It was the euphoria of someone who believes they have gotten away with murder. "Who is paying for this round?" Tiffany screamed over the music, zooming in on Bianca's face. Bianca threw her head back and laughed, slurring her words. "Who do you think? The Bank of Hazel opened 24 hours. Baby." The group erupted in cheers. Bianca took a swig straight from the bottle, spilling foam down her chin. "Seriously, though," she shouted, addressing the camera as if it were a confidant. "I finally did it. I finally got out from under the shadow. No more Hazel's little sister. This weekend is about me, pure me, and the best part? She is paying for the party she isn't even invited to." I took a sip of my own wine. It was a Pinot Noir, dry and earthy. My hand was perfectly steady. I watched my sister mock me to a live audience of 300 followers, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. "You are a genius, Tiffany shrieked. The camera panned again, swinging wildly to the right, and landed on my mother. Meredith was sitting in a booth, looking flushed and glassy-eyed. She was holding court with a group of aunts and cousins. Tiffany, in her drunken clumsiness, didn't realize she was lingering on a private conversation. The music dipped for a moment during a track change, and the microphone on the phone picked up my mother's voice with crystal clarity. "Honestly, it is a relief," Meredith was saying, gesturing with a martini glass. "Hazel is just heavy. She brings this weight into the room. She is only good for the checkbook. Her heart is as dry as a roof tile. She doesn't understand passion. This wedding is about Bianca's class, her spirit. We don't need Hazel dampening the mood with her judgment. Dry as a roof tile. I rewound the video in 10 seconds. I played it again. Her heart is as dry as a roof tile. I didn't turn off the TV. I picked up my remote and hit the record button on the screen mirroring software. I saved the clip. Then I saved it again to an external hard drive. Then I uploaded it to a private cloud server. Class, I whispered to the empty room. You want to talk about class, Mother? I looked around my apartment. Every piece of art, every stick of furniture, every square inch of the view overlooking the Charles River was paid for by my own labor. I had built a life of substance. They were drowning in a life of appearance. The phone rang an hour later. It was Julian. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I needed to sound groggy, as if I had been sleeping, oblivious to the fact that they were publicly assassinating my character 5 miles away. Hello, I answered, infusing my voice with a hint of fatigue. Hazel. Hey, sorry to call so late, Julian said. He sounded breathless, and there was background noise, the same thumping bass I had just heard on the live stream. He had stepped outside, probably to the smoking patio. It is fine, Julian. What do you need? Look, we have a small hiccup, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The venue, Richard, the manager, he said we need extra security, like a VIP detail. Extra security? I asked, feigning ignorance. The estate is gated. Why do you need more? Well, you know, he stammered, clearly improvising. With the governor coming, and all the high-profile guests plus, we heard there might be some paparazzi. We want to keep it exclusive. Richard said it is an extra $5,000 for a specialized team. He needs it wired tonight or they can't book the guards. I almost laughed. It was so transparent. They didn't need security for the paparazzi. Nobody cared about Bianca's wedding. They needed security to keep me out. They were asking me to pay for the bouncers who would be instructed to slam the gate in my face. $5,000, I repeated. That is a lot for last-minute guards. I know, Julian said, his voice turning wheedling. But you want Bianca to be safe, right? You want the day to be perfect. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency. My cards are all tied up in the honeymoon deposits. Okay, I said. I will handle it. You are a lifesaver. Hayes, seriously. Just wire it to my account, and I will pay the agency directly. Richard said it is faster that way. Of course he did. He wanted the cash in his hand. I can't wire it to your personal account. Julian, my accountant flags transfers to non-vendors over a certain amount. It triggers an audit. I lied. But I can transfer it to the event escrow account I set up for the catering overages. You have access to view it, right? Yeah, sure, Julian said, clearly not knowing what an escrow account was but not wanting to sound stupid. That works. Done. Give me 5 minutes. I hung up and opened my laptop. I logged into my banking portal. I initiated a transfer of $5,000, but I didn't send it to Julian. I sent it to a holding account, a specific subledger within the main wedding trust I had established. Here is the beauty of the financial trap I set. The notification system was set to alert the secondary users, Julian and Bianca, whenever funds were deposited. However, the withdrawal rights were restricted solely to the primary administrator, me. I typed in the memo line, Security Services Allocation. I hit send. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Got the notification, you are amazing. Thanks for having our backs. He hadn't even opened the app to check the balance availability. He just saw the push notification deposit of $5,000 received. He assumed the money was his to spend. He was likely walking back into the club right now, ordering another round of shots, putting it on a credit card he believed he could pay off in the morning with my money. The dairy cow has been milked, I muttered, deleting his text. The next morning, I went to war, or rather, I went to work. I arrived at Sterling and Thorne at 6:45. I wore a suit so sharp it could cut glass charcoal gray, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. My hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. I didn't walk through the hallways. I cut through the air. My assistant, Mark, looked terrified when I walked in. I usually greeted him with a polite inquiry about his weekend. Today, I simply dropped a stack of files on his desk. "Cancel the lunch with the Tokyo partners," I said. "Reschedule it for next month, and get me the Q3 projections for the tech sector. I want them on my desk in 10 minutes. "Yes, Ms. Winfield," Mark squeaked. I worked with a ferocity that was frightening. I processed 3 weeks of strategy assessments in 6 hours. I dismantled a competitor's proposal during a conference call with such ruthless efficiency that the opposing CEO went silent for a full minute. My colleagues gave me a wide berth. They sensed the energy radiating off me. It wasn't anger. It was the cold fusion of a woman who has realized she has nothing left to lose because she has already cut the dead weight. At 2:00, I had a visitor. Daniel Thorne. He was a junior partner at the firm, a brilliant legal mind, and my ex-boyfriend. We had dated for 2 years before breaking up because I was too married to my family, and he was too married to the law. We had remained friends, bonded by our mutual appreciation for ironclad contracts. He closed the door to my office and sat down, placing a leather folio on my desk. "You look like you are planning a murder, Hazel," he said, his voice low and amused. "Better," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "I am planning a lesson. Did you draft it?" I did. He slid a document across the mahogany surface. The header read, "Notice of irrevocable sponsorship termination and demand for restitution." It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It detailed every penny I had spent, every condition that had been violated, and the immediate cessation of all financial liability. It cited the hostile environment clause, the misappropriation of funds clause, and half a dozen other legal pitfalls my family had blindly walked into. "You know this is nuclear, right?" Daniel asked, watching me as I read. "Once you serve this, there is no going back. This destroys their credit, their reputation, and potentially puts your brother-in-law in legal jeopardy for that little wine fraud stunt you told me about." "I know," I said, picking up a pen. "Are you sure, Hazel, this is your sister?" I looked up at him. Daniel had seen me cry over Bianca. He had held me when I missed our anniversary dinner because Bianca had a panic attack about a haircut. He knew the history. "They uninvited me." "Daniel," I said softly. "They took $85,000, mocked me on a live stream, and then hired security to keep me out. They don't have a sister. They have a sponsor, and the sponsorship deal has expired." Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, a look of grim respect on his face. "Then sign it," he said. "I will have the courier ready for Saturday morning." I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. "One more thing," I said, handing the document back to him. "I need you to handle the delivery personally, or rather, ensure the timing is precise. I want this handed to Richard Sterling at the estate exactly 10 minutes before the ceremony is scheduled to begin." "Sadistic," Daniel murmured. "I like it." After he left, I opened a new browser window. I navigated to the website of a luxury travel agency. I had been looking at this destination for years, saving it for a honeymoon I never had, or a retirement I hadn't yet earned. Maldives, the Saint, Regis Vomoli Resort, Overwater Villa. I selected the dates, departing Friday night, arriving Sunday morning. I would be in the air when the bomb went off. I would be 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, sipping champagne in a first-class cabin, unreachable, untouchable, and absent. I booked the ticket, one way. I didn't check in yet. I wanted the alert to remain silent. I wanted them to think I was sitting in my apartment, sulking, waiting for their permission to exist. I packed my bag that night, not a suitcase for a wedding guest, but a trunk for a new life. I packed the silk dresses I never wore because they were too flashy. I packed the bikini I never wore because I was too busy. I packed my passport. I left the gray dress, the one my mother had forced me to buy, hanging on the outside of my closet door. I pinned a note to it. For the next ATM. It was petty, perhaps, but as I stood in the center of my living room, looking at the city lights one last time, I realized that for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't fixing anything. I was just leaving. The masquerade was over. The masks were about to come off, and the gold diggers were about to find out that the mine had collapsed on top of their heads. 5 days remained on the clock. In the world of high-stakes corporate mergers, this is known as the quiet period, the calm before the announcement that changes the market forever. In the world of my family, however, silence was impossible. They were allergic to it. They needed constant noise to drown out the reality of what they were doing. I was back at my desk at Sterling and Thorne, orchestrating the final movements of my symphony from behind a firewall of professionalism. My plan relied on a psychological element that never failed paranoia. I had instructed Richard Sterling and the key vendors, the florist, the lighting director, the head of catering, to maintain a facade of absolute, cheerful compliance, but I gave them a specific script. They were to be helpful. Yes, but they were to remind Bianca and Julian of the power dynamics in every single sentence. It started on Monday morning. I knew this because Richard sent me a discreet text update. The subject is agitated. Bianca had called the lighting company, Luminous, to demand a change in the color scheme. She wanted to switch from warm amber to blush pink for the reception dinner. It was a whimsical, last-minute change that usually drove vendors crazy, but Luminous was ready. Of course, we can look into that, the account manager told her. I wasn't on the call, but I could hear the conversation in my mind as clearly as if I were standing next to her. However, the contract specified by Ms. Hazel Winfield lists amber. We are contractually obligated to fulfill Ms. Winfield's vision unless we receive a written addendum signed by her. I am the bride, Bianca had reportedly screamed. I am the one wearing the white dress. Why does everyone keep saying her name? We understand that, ma'am, the manager replied, his voice dripping with professional detachment. But in the event industry, the client is the payer. Ms. Winfield's contract is quite specific about unauthorized alterations. If you wish to change the lighting design, we would need to void the current agreement. Issue a refund to Ms. Winfield's account, which takes 10 to 14 business days, and then open a new contract under your name. The deposit would be $4,000, payable immediately. $4,000 to Bianca, right now. That was a fortune. It was the difference between a honeymoon and staying in a motel. Fine, she snapped. Keep the amber. Just stop talking about her. As you wish. Everything will proceed exactly according to Ms. Winfield's instructions. They were trapped. They were living in a house I had built, eating food I had selected, and dancing under lights I had approved, all while trying to erase me from the picture. They were realizing that you cannot simply crop out the person who owns the camera. To tighten the screws, I decided to send a little message. I didn't want to talk to them. Voice contact would humanize me, and I needed to be a force of nature, not a sister. So I composed an email. I sent it to the group thread that included Bianca, Julian, and my parents. Subject: final preparations. Dear all, I understand tensions are high as the big day approaches. I want you to know that despite the change in guest list, I have ensured that every detail remains paid for and scheduled. I want this wedding to be unforgettable. In fact, I have arranged a special surprise gift for the reception, something that will truly reveal the depth of our family bond. It will be delivered at the very last minute. Good luck with the final week. I hit send. It was vague, it was ominous, and it was designed to terrify them. A surprise gift. To a normal family, this would sound generous. To a family that had just stabbed their benefactor in the back, it sounded like a bomb threat. Within an hour, the hidden Facebook group, which I was still monitoring via Sarah's login, exploded. Julian. What does she mean by surprise? Is she going to crash it? Meredith. She is up to something. Hazel never does anything without a reason. Reveal the depth of our family bond. That sounds sarcastic. She is mocking us. Bianca. I can't deal with this. What if she sends a stripper? What if she sends a clown? What if she shows up in that blue dress and tries to give a speech? Julian. We need to lock this down. We can't let her in. If she steps foot on the property, she ruins the vibe. They were so predictable. Guilt is a powerful hallucinogen. It makes you see monsters in every shadow. By Wednesday, they had acted exactly as I anticipated. Julian contacted the security firm, Eagle Eye Protection, which was contracted for the estate. He requested a perimeter upgrade. What Julian didn't know, because he never paid attention to my work, was that Eagle Eye Protection was a subsidiary of a conglomerate that Sterling and Thorne had restructured 2 years ago. The CEO, a man named Jonas, was a personal friend of mine. We played squash on Thursdays. Jonas called me at 2 in the afternoon. "Hazel." His voice was gravelly and amused. "I have a weird request here from Julian Thorne, related to you." "My sister's fiancé," I said, leaning back in my chair, staring at the skyline. "Right. Well, this guy just sent over a digital dossier. It is a photograph of you, high resolution. He wants copies distributed to every guard at the gate. The instruction is barred from entry. He says you are a, quote, volatile relative with a history of creating public disturbances. He is paying an extra $5,000 for a VIP denial of entry team." I felt a sharp, metallic taste in my mouth. Volatile relative, public disturbances. They were rewriting my history to strangers to justify their cruelty. "Take the money, Jonas," I said calmly. "Hazel, come on. I can't put a do not admit order on you. You are practically family to the firm." "No, I mean it. Take the money. Process the order. Distribute the photos." "Why?" Jonas asked, baffled. "Because I am not coming. Jonas, I have no intention of setting foot on that property. If they want to spend $5,000 of my own money because that is where he got it to guard an empty gate against a ghost, let them. It makes them feel safe, and I want them to feel very, very safe until Saturday." Jonas paused. "You are terrifying. You know that?" "I am just efficient. Send me a copy of the security order, Jonas, for my scrapbook." "You got it." When the PDF arrived in my inbox, my own face, smiling professionally in my corporate headshot, stamped with a red denied watermark, I printed it out. It was the final piece of evidence I needed to kill the last lingering bit of affection I held for them. They weren't just uninviting me. They were criminalizing my presence. I wasn't the only one who saw the cruelty. The walls at Sterling and Thorne are glass, but the secrets are few. Rumors had started to circulate. My sudden cancellation of meetings, the tense calls, the way I had stopped eating lunch. Mark, my assistant, came into my office on Thursday morning. He looked nervous, clutching a tablet. "Ms. Winfield." "Yes, Mark." "I know this is out of line," he stammered, "but the legal courier mentioned the papers you signed, the termination of sponsorship, and then I saw the security alert on the printer." He took a breath. "Are they really banning you from your own sister's wedding after you paid for it?" I looked at him. Mark was 24, eager and kind. He looked genuinely horrified. "Yes, Mark, they are—" "That is disgusting," he said, his face flushing red. "Ms. Winfield, my cousin works for the Boston Globe, in the lifestyle section. If you want, I could drop a tip. Let them know what kind of people the Winfields really are. We could humiliate them before the first bottle of champagne is popped." It was a tempting offer, a trial by the media. I could destroy their social standing with a single headline, "Bride Band's Benefactor Sister." But I shook my head. "No, Mark, thank you. I appreciate the loyalty, truly, but this isn't a PR war. This is a private execution. If the press gets involved now, my family will play the victim. They will cry about privacy and mental health. I need them to be caught in the act. I need the humiliation to come from the facts, not the rumors." Mark nodded slowly. "You have a plan." "I always have a plan. Now, go get me the files on the merger." I was protecting the integrity of my revenge. It had to be clean, it had to be legal, and it had to be absolute. That evening, the final blow came from the man who should have been my defender. My father, Arthur Winfield, called me at 7:30. I was packing the last of my things into the trunk of my car. preparing for the drive to the airport the next day. I looked at the caller ID. Dad, I answered. Hello, Father. Hazel, his voice boomed, deep and authoritative, the voice he used to command boardrooms before he lost his company. We need to get something straight. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask why I hadn't been at the rehearsal dinner. I am listening, I said. Your mother tells me you sent some sort of cryptic email about a surprise, and Julian says you are being passive-aggressive with the vendors. Now, listen to me. I will not have you ruining this weekend. I haven't done anything, Father. The vendors are following the contracts. Don't play word games with me, he shouted. You are jealous. You have always been jealous of Bianca because she knows how to enjoy life and you only know how to work. You are bitter because she is getting the fairy tale, and you are sitting alone in that apartment. I paid for the fairy tale. Dad, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I bought the castle. I bought the carriage. That is your duty, he roared. You are the eldest. You have the means. It is what you are supposed to do for your family. Money is all you have to offer. Hazel, you certainly don't offer warmth. You don't offer support. You just throw cash at problems and expect people to bow down to you. Well, we are not bowing. We are taking what is owed to us. Money is all you have to offer. The words hung in the air, vibrating with 20 years of neglected birthdays, missed graduations, and silent checks written to cover his gambling debts. He was telling me, explicitly, that my value was purely transactional. I was a utility, and like a utility, I was expected to function silently in the background. So, Arthur continued, his voice lowering to a menacing growl, if you try to show up at that gate, if you try to make a scene, I will personally ensure you are removed. Do not embarrass this family. Hazel, do not make us look like fools. Stay away, keep your mouth shut, and let your sister shine. Do you understand me? I stood there in my living room, the phone pressed to my ear. I looked at the gray dress hanging on the door. I looked at the flight confirmation on my screen. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list the sacrifices I had made to keep a roof over his head. I simply inhaled, and then I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Hazel, are you there? He barked. 4 seconds, 5 seconds. Answer me, damn it. 6 seconds, 7 seconds. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. It was the sound of a bridge burning. It was the sound of a daughter resigning from her post. 8 seconds, 9 seconds, 10 seconds. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I looked at the screen one last time. Then I pressed the red button. I blocked the number. That was it. The last interaction. There would be no more words between us. He wanted me to stay away. I would go further than he could ever imagine. He wanted me to keep my mouth shut. My silence would cost him everything. I picked up my suitcase and walked out the door. The cat had stopped playing. It was time to close the trap. 3 days remained. The countdown clock in my head was ticking with the precision of a bomb detonator. But to the rest of the world, it was just a Wednesday evening in Newport. The rehearsal dinner was being held at the Gilded Anchor, a private dining club overlooking the harbor. It was the kind of place where the clam chowder cost $40 a bowl, and the waiters wore white gloves to pour tap water. I knew the menu by heart because I had approved the proofs for the letterpress stationery 2 months ago. I knew that they were starting with lobster bisque, moving to a rack of lamb with mint reduction, and finishing with a chocolate soufflé that had to be ordered 20 minutes in advance. I also knew that my seat at the head table, right next to the father of the bride, was empty. I was not in Newport. I was in my apartment in Boston, sitting in the dark, illuminated only by the cool blue light of my triple monitor setup. I had Sarah to thank for the play-by-play. My cousin had managed to smuggle her phone under the tablecloth, texting me updates between courses. Sarah, the bisque is cold. Aunt Carol just asked where you are. Get ready for the lie. I sipped my sparkling water and waited. I could picture the scene perfectly. My mother, Meredith, would be wearing the emerald silk dress I bought her for her 50th birthday. She would dab her mouth with a linen napkin, put on her most tragic, long-suffering smile, and lean in as if sharing a state secret. Sarah, Mom just told the table. Oh, poor Hazel. She is absolutely devastated. She was called away to Tokyo on urgent business for the firm. You know how demanding her career is. She tried to charter a jet to get back, but the timing just didn't work. Tokyo. It was a solid lie. It sounded important, distant, and expensive. It played into the narrative that I was a high-flying corporate machine who prioritized mergers over matrimony. Sarah, now Bianca is chiming in. She is doing the sad little sister act. I could hear Bianca's voice in my head, soft and breathy, the voice she used when she wanted something. I am so heartbroken she isn't here. But honestly, I am used to it. Hazel always puts the company first. It is just who she is. I guess some people are married to their jobs, and some people are lucky enough to marry for love. Marry for love, I whispered to my empty living room, a dry laugh escaping my throat. You are marrying for health insurance and a country club membership, Bianca, and I am the one paying the dues. The hypocrisy was nauseating. They were sitting there, eating the lamb I paid for, drinking the wine I selected, surrounded by flowers I ordered, using my absence to paint themselves as the victims of my ambition. They were feasting on my generosity while spitting on my name. It was time to clear the table. I turned my attention to the center monitor. I had prepared a spreadsheet titled Operation Clean Slate. It was a list of every vendor, every contract, and every cancellation clause. I started with the flowers. The floral arrangements for the wedding were not just bouquets, they were architectural installations. Bianca had demanded thousands of white hydrangeas and those specific, obscenely expensive Dutch tulips with the violet centers. The total contract with the Gilded Lily florist was $28,000. I had already paid a $13,000 deposit. The final balance of $15,000 was scheduled to be auto-drafted from my account tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I opened my email client. I drafted a new message to the owner of the floral shop, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who was sweet but terrified of conflict. Subject: immediate cancellation of contract number 4099, Winfield/Thorne event. Dear Mrs. Higgins, pursuant to Clause 7, Section B of our agreement regarding sponsor rights and respect, I am hereby exercising my right to terminate the contract effective immediately. As the sole financier and client of record, I am withdrawing all financial support for this event due to a breach of the conduct policy by the beneficiaries. Do not deliver the flowers. Do not process the final payment of $15,000. Any attempt to charge my card will be contested as fraud. However, I have a specific instruction regarding notification. In order to minimize disruption to your own workflow this evening, please do not inform the secondary contact Bianca Winfield until tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I want to ensure the cancellation is processed in your banking system before the panic begins. Sincerely, Hazel Winfield. I hovered my mouse over the send button. I thought about the empty space where the floral arch was supposed to be. I thought about the bare tables. I thought about Bianca screaming when she realized her fairy tale garden had turned into a barren wasteland. I clicked send. The email whooshed away. $15,000 saved. One dream was crushed. I didn't stop. I moved down the list to the next item, the beauty team. Bianca had insisted on flying in Alessandro, a celebrity makeup artist from Soho, along with his team of 3 assistants. Their fee was astronomical, but the logistics were even worse. I had booked 4 first-class tickets from JFK to Providence and 3 suites at the Hotel Viking. I logged into the airline's corporate portal. Reservation, Alessandro Valenti +3. Status confirmed. I clicked Cancel Booking. The system asked for a reason. I selected Change of Plans. Refund amount $4,200 credited to original form of payment. I confirmed the cancellation. Then I logged into the hotel site and canceled the rooms. Alessandro was a notorious diva. When he arrived at the airport tomorrow morning to find his ticket invalid, he wouldn't call Bianca to ask what happened. He would simply go home. He didn't fly coach, and he certainly didn't deal with declined credit cards. Bianca would be left with her local bridesmaid, Tiffany, who learned how to do contouring from YouTube tutorials. The dominoes were lined up. I was just tipping them over, one by one, with the tip of my finger. But these were just the appetizers. The main course was the financial foundation of the Winfield family itself. My parents, Arthur and Meredith, liked to pretend they were wealthy. They lived in a large house, drove leased luxury cars, and belonged to the right clubs. But the truth was, they were cash poor. Their lifestyle was sustained by a portfolio of stocks that I managed for them. Years ago, when Dad's company went under, I salvaged what was left of their retirement savings. I put it into a high-yield brokerage account under my name to protect it from his creditors. It was legally my money, but morally. I had always considered it theirs. I grew it, nurtured it, and used the dividends to pay for their property taxes and their country club fees. They called it the family trust. I called it the burden. Tonight, the burden was being lifted. I logged into the brokerage account. The balance stared back at me, $212,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was everything they had to fall back on. It was the security blanket that allowed them to sleep at night while they insulted me during the day. I navigated to the trade tab. Action sell all. Symbol all positions. Order type market. A warning box popped up. Are you sure you want to liquidate this entire portfolio? This action is irreversible and will trigger a significant tax event. I looked at the text message Sarah had sent me 10 minutes ago. Sarah, your dad just made a toast, he said, to Bianca, the daughter who brings light and joy to this family. Unlike some who only bring spreadsheets. I didn't hesitate. I clicked execute trade. The screen refreshed. Order filled. The money would settle in my personal checking account in 2 business days. I wasn't stealing it, it was legally mine, in an account under my name. Funded by my strategies, I was simply reclaiming my labor. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, they could survive without a stranger's charity. I checked the time. It was 11:30 at night. The rehearsal dinner would be winding down. They would be hugging, exchanging fake compliments, and stumbling back to their rooms, drunk on champagne and self-righteousness. I had one last task for the night, the surprise gift I had teased in my email. I opened my email scheduler. I composed a message addressed to Bianca, Julian, Mom, and Dad. Subject: a gift of clarity. Scheduled for Saturday, 11 a.m. The body of the email was empty. Attached was a single file, a zip folder containing the high-definition video of the live stream where they mocked me. The screenshots of the hidden Facebook group, the recording of Bianca impersonating me to the wine distributor, and a PDF of the final invoice from the venue showing the outstanding balance of $68,000 that I had just unpaid. It was a digital bomb, set to detonate exactly 1 hour before the ceremony was supposed to start. By the time they opened it, the flowers would be gone. The makeup artist would be absent, and the venue manager would be demanding payment. This email would tell them exactly why. I set the timer. The little clock icon appeared next to the send button. I closed my laptop. The silence in my apartment didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt clean. It felt expansive. For years. My mind had been cluttered with their needs, their schedules, their debts, their opinions. Now, there was space. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, in the tangle of streets and lives, people were struggling to pay rent, struggling to find love, struggling to be seen. I had spent my life trying to buy visibility from people who were determined to keep me invisible. I went to my bedroom. I stripped off my stiff corporate clothes and put on a pair of silk pajamas I had bought in Paris 3 years ago and never worn because they felt too indulgent. I slid into my bed. The sheets were cool and crisp. I thought about the chaos that would erupt in approximately 9 hours when Mrs. Higgins, the florist, made her call. I thought about the panic in Alessandro's eyes at JFK. I thought about the look on my father's face when the dividends stopped arriving next month. And then, I stopped thinking about them entirely. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't have a to-do list for tomorrow. I didn't have a crisis to manage. I didn't have a check to write. I fell asleep within minutes. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of rest that only comes to the innocent and the fully exonerated. While my family raised their glasses to toast a lie in Newport, I slept the sleep of the just in Boston, gathering my strength for the final act. They wanted a wedding without Hazel Winfield. Tomorrow, they will get exactly that, and they would realize that without Hazel Winfield, a wedding is just a room full of hungry people waiting for a dinner that never comes. The sun rose over Newport with a deceptive serenity. The sky was a perfect, innocent blue, the kind that usually heralds a perfect day. But inside the bridal suite of the Azure Cliffs estate, the atmosphere was already fracturing. At 7:30 in the morning, Bianca sat in her silk robe, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror. Her face was bare, her hair unwashed. She was waiting for Alessandro. The celebrity makeup artist was scheduled to arrive at 7:15 to begin the 4-hour process of transforming her into a vision of ethereal grace. At 7:45, she picked up her phone. "Where are they?" she snapped at Tiffany. "Text the production manager. Alessandro is 30 minutes late. Does he know who I am?" Tiffany, hungover and pale, tapped furiously on her screen. "I am trying. No one is answering." At 8 o'clock, Bianca's phone rang. It wasn't Alessandro. It was the agency rep from New York. "Is this Bianca Winfield?" the voice asked, clipped and cold. "Yes. Where's my team?" "I am sitting here with nothing on my face and guests arrive in 6 hours." "Ms. Winfield, there is no team coming. The booking was canceled yesterday evening by the account holder, Ms. Hazel Winfield. The flights and accommodations were voided. Alessandro is currently in Manhattan." "Canceled," Bianca screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "She can't cancel. It is my face. Put him on a plane right now." "I am afraid that is impossible. We are fully booked, and frankly, after the verbal abuse our staff received from your mother last week, we are not inclined to do favors. Good luck." The line went dead. Bianca threw the phone across the room. It hit the velvet sofa with a dull thud. "Mom," she shrieked. "Mom, she did it. The bitch actually did it." Meredith rushed in from the adjoining room, her hair in rollers. What happened?" "Hazel canceled Alessandro. He is not coming. I have no makeup artist." Meredith's face went white. She grabbed her own phone and dialed my number. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time." "She blocked me," Meredith gasped. "She blocked me too." Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in, but they didn't have time to process it because at 8:15, the second blow landed. Julian burst into the room, his face slick with sweat. "The flowers," he panted. "The florist just called. They are not delivering the tulips. They said the order was terminated due to a breach of sponsor contract." "No," Bianca wailed, clutching her chest. "Not the tulips. The entire theme is violet sunrise. I can't have a sunrise without the purple centers." "I tried to offer them my card," Julian said, his hands shaking. "I told them to just rebill it. They ran it." "And Meredith demanded?" Julian looked down at his shoes. "Declined. Insufficient funds. I maxed it out on the ring upgrade." Bianca's eyes rolled back in her head, and she crumpled onto the floor in a heap of white silk. "Get some water," Meredith yelled at Tiffany. Arthur, get in here." My father lumbered into the room, still in his pajamas. When he heard the news, his face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "That ungrateful, spiteful little—" He trailed off, grabbing his phone. "I will fix this. I know people in this town. I will get flowers. I will get a makeup artist. Don't worry, Princess. Daddy will fix it." He started making calls, but it was Saturday morning in peak wedding season. Every reputable florist was booked. Every high-end makeup artist was busy. "Hello." "Jim." "Yes, it is Arthur. Look, I need a favor. Big favor. My daughter's florist. Well, there was a mix-up. I need what you can't, Jim. We played golf last week." He slammed the phone down. Useless! While they were scrambling, running around the suite like ants whose hill had been kicked over. I was standing in the Delta Sky Club at Logan Airport. I ordered a mimosa. I was wearing a white linen suit and oversized sunglasses. I looked like a woman with zero cares in the world. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure Wi-Fi. I logged into the security camera feed for the Azure Cliffs estate. The feed was crisp and clear. I saw the ballroom. It was set up with tables and chairs. But the centerpieces were missing. It looked stark, almost clinical. I switched to the camera in the hallway outside the bridal suite. I saw my father pacing back and forth, shouting into his phone. I saw Tiffany running out with an ice bucket. It was like watching a reality show where I had written the script. But I hadn't destroyed everything, not yet. I checked the catering status. The food trucks were still arriving. The appetizers were being prepped. The venue was still unlocked. I needed the guests to come. I needed an audience. If I canceled the food now, the wedding would be called off before anyone arrived. They would just send a mass text saying, "Emergency cancellation," and spin a story about me having a breakdown. No, I needed the guests to walk into the trap. I needed them to see the cracks before the ceiling collapsed. I watched as my mother made a decision. She was a survivor. I would give her that. "We improvise," Meredith declared, her voice tinny through the audio feed of the hallway camera. "Tiffany, go to the mall, go to Sephora, buy whatever you need. You do Bianca's makeup. You are good at it." "But I am not Alessandro," Tiffany protested. "You are today." "And Julian, go to the craft store, buy silk flowers, get the best ones they have. We will mix them with greenery from the garden. No one will notice from a distance. We just need to get through the ceremony." "Silk flowers." Julian looked horrified. "That is tacky." "It is necessary," Meredith snapped. "Hazel is trying to scare us. She thinks we will fold. We will not fold. We will show her that we don't need her money to have class. We will pull this off, and then we will sue her for every penny she has." They were delusional. They truly believed that class was something you could fake with polyester petals and small makeup. They thought my power was just writing checks, not the strategic leverage I held over the entire infrastructure of their lives. I decided to send a little encouragement, a nudge to keep them moving toward the cliff edge. I unblocked Julian's number for exactly 1 minute. I typed a message. "To Julian, from Hazel Message. If you want to play the big man, pay the big bills. Good luck with the plastic flowers. They match your personality." I hit send, then immediately blocked him again. On the screen, I saw Julian check his phone. He stopped dead in the hallway. He showed the phone to Meredith. She read it, her face twisting into a snarl. She pointed a finger at the camera in the corner of the ceiling, as if she knew I was watching. "She is watching us," Meredith mouthed. They looked around wildly, but they couldn't stop. It was 10 o'clock. Guests would start arriving in 2 hours. They had to commit. "Ignore her," Arthur barked. "She is bluffing. She won't cancel the food or the venue. She would lose the deposit. She is too cheap to lose $50,000 just to make a point. Keep moving." "Too cheap." I laughed, a soft sound that was lost in the hum of the airport lounge. He still didn't understand. This wasn't about saving money. It was about spending it to buy my freedom. I checked the status of the surprise gift email, scheduled for 11 o'clock, 1 hour remaining. At the estate, the chaos was organized but frantic. Tiffany was painting Bianca's face with a heavy hand, trying to cover the blotchy red marks from her crying fit. Julian and his groomsmen were stripping branches off the estate's landscaping bushes to shove into vases with the fake flowers he had bought from a discount store. It looked pathetic. The grand violet sunrise theme had turned into a desperate backyard BBQ aesthetic. But they were proceeding. They were driven by a mixture of pride and fear. They couldn't cancel. To cancel would be to admit defeat. To cancel would be to admit that without Hazel, they were nothing. So they pasted on their smiles. They zipped up the dress. "You look beautiful, baby," Meredith told Bianca, adjusting the veil to hide the slightly uneven eyeliner. "No one will know. We are Winfields. We make it work." "I hate her," Bianca whispered, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "I want her dead." "Living well is the best revenge," Meredith said. "We will have this wedding, we will take the photos, and we will cut her out of our lives forever." I closed the laptop. My flight was boarding. Flight 890 to Malé via Dubai, first class. I walked to the gate. I handed my boarding pass to the agent. "Have a wonderful trip, Ms. Winfield," she said, scanning the code. "Oh, I will," I replied. "I am leaving a lot of baggage behind." As I walked down the jet bridge, I checked the time on my watch, 10:30. In 30 minutes, Richard Sterling would receive a courier envelope from Daniel. In 30 minutes, my family would receive the email. In 90 minutes, the ceremony would begin. I wouldn't be there to see the explosion, but I knew exactly what it would look like. I had designed the demolition, after all, and as the plane taxied down the runway, picking up speed, I felt the exact moment when the wheels left the ground. Gravity released me, and back in Newport, gravity was about to crush them. While the landing gear of my Emirates flight retracted with a satisfying thud, sealing me into a pressurized tube of luxury and silence. The trap I had laid in Newport was springing shut with the violent precision of a bear trap. I was not there to witness it, but I did not need to be. I knew the variables, I knew the players, and thanks to the security footage I would review days later with a glass of vintage Bordeaux in my hand. I can recount the unraveling of the Winfield dynasty with forensic accuracy. It began at 11:30 in the morning. The guests arrived at the Azure Cliffs estate expecting the event of the season. These were people who knew the difference between thread counts. People who could taste the vintage of a wine by the cork alone. They rolled up the limestone driveway in their Bentleys and Mercedes, stepping out into the salt-kissed air, ready to be impressed. Instead, they were greeted by the uncanny valley of weddings. The first thing they noticed was the silence. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi on the lawn, as the invitation had promised. I had canceled the musicians 48 hours prior. In their place, Julian had set up a pair of Bluetooth speakers he had likely dragged out of his fraternity days storage. They were hidden clumsily behind a bush, pumping out a Spotify playlist that was punctuated every 3 songs by an aggressive advertisement for car insurance. Then, there were the flowers. From a distance, the archway at the end of the aisle looked colorful, but as the guests moved closer, filing into the white folding chairs, the illusion disintegrated. The violet sunrise theme had been cobbled together from a craft store clearance aisle. The petals had the stiff, shiny sheen of polyester. There was no delicate fragrance of Dutch tulips. There was only the smell of hot plastic baking in the midday sun and the chemical tang of spray adhesive. I can imagine Mrs. van der Hoven, the doyenne of Newport society, reaching out a gloved hand to touch a hydrangea, only to recoil when she realized it was made of scratchy fabric. The whisper started then, a low buzzing hum that traveled through the rows of guests like a contagion. "Are those fake? I thought Hazel was funding this. Surely she wouldn't allow plastic. Where is Hazel? By the way, I haven't seen her." Inside the manor, the atmosphere was less like a celebration and more like a hostage situation. Bianca stood in the bridal suite, staring at herself in the full-length mirror. Tiffany had done her best, but Tiffany was an accountant, not a makeup artist. Under the harsh natural light pouring in from the windows, the foundation looked thick and cakey, a shade too orange for Bianca's pale complexion. The contouring was unblended, sitting on her cheekbones like stripes of war paint. Bianca wasn't crying anymore. She was vibrating with a frequency of rage that was almost visible. She smoothed the skirt of her Vera Wang gown, the only authentic thing left in the wedding, and looked at her mother. "Do they know?" Bianca asked, her voice tight. "No one knows anything," Meredith lied, adjusting her own hat. Her hands were shaking. "We just need to get through the ceremony. Once you say, 'I do,' it is done. We deal with the bills later. Just smile. You are the princess." "I look like a clown," Bianca spat. "You look beautiful," Meredith insisted, though her eyes were darting around the room as if expecting a SWAT team to burst through the walls. "Now, let's go. Julian is waiting." Julian was indeed waiting. He was standing at the altar, sweating through his custom tuxedo. It wasn't just the heat. It was the crushing weight of the $68,000 debt that was currently hanging over his head. Invisible to the guests, but suffocating to him. He kept checking his watch, then checking the side entrance, terrified that I would materialize like a vengeful spirit to object to the union. He didn't know that my objection had already been filed, not with a shout, but with a signature on a termination notice. The procession began. The Bluetooth speaker crackled, hissed, and then began to play Pachelbel's Canon in D. The sound quality was tinny, lacking the rich, swelling resonance of the live cellos I had originally booked. It sounded cheap. It sounded like a wedding in a mall food court. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle, their smiles fixed and brittle. They were rushing, walking too fast, eager to get the public display over with. Then came Bianca. She stepped out onto the grass, clutching her bouquet of silk peonies so hard her knuckles were white. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were darting left and right, scanning the crowd, scanning the perimeter. She wasn't looking at her groom with love. She was looking for the disaster she knew was coming. The guests stood up. They clapped politely, but the energy was wrong. There was no collective gasp of awe. There was a sense of confusion, a shared feeling that something was fundamentally broken. "She looks tense," a cousin whispered in the third row. "And look at Meredith," another whispered back. "She looks like she's about to vomit." My mother was walking Bianca down the aisle, stepping in for my father who was already at the altar. Meredith was smiling so hard, her facial muscles must have been spasming. She nodded to the guests, but her eyes were pleading. "Please don't notice the flowers. Please don't notice the cheap music. Please just let us get away with this." They reached the altar. Julian took Bianca's hand. His palm was damp. "You made it," he whispered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Shut up and marry me," Bianca hissed back through her teeth, maintaining her rictus grin. The priest, Father Mulligan, cleared his throat. He was an old friend of the family, oblivious to the war that was being waged over the invoices. He opened his book. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice booming over the crowd without a microphone, because the audio system I had rented had been repossessed along with the DJ equipment. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Bianca and Julian in the sight of God and these witnesses." The ceremony dragged on. The sun beat down. The guests shifted in their seats. Then came the moment for the reading. My father, Arthur Winfield, stepped up to the lectern. He adjusted his tie, trying to project the image of the benevolent patriarch. He tapped the microphone that was attached to the podium, the house mic that belonged to the venue, not the rental company. "Testing," Arthur said. The sound cut out. He tapped it again. Silence. He looked toward the back of the venue, toward the sound booth, waving his hand irritably. "Sound, can we get some sound here?" Nothing. The guests shifted uncomfortably. A few coughs rippled through the audience. Arthur flustered, leaning forward. "Well," he shouted, trying to project his voice, "I suppose I will just have to speak from the heart technology. Am I right?" He laughed nervously. No one laughed with him. He launched into his speech, a rambling monologue about family values and legacy. "The Winfield name," he bellowed, his face turning red with the effort, "has always stood for integrity, for generosity, for holding together through the storm." The irony was so thick it could have choked a horse. He was standing amidst plastic flowers, paid for by a maxed-out credit card, preaching about integrity while plotting to defraud a venue manager. I wasn't there to hear it, but I imagine the universe itself cringed. Arthur finished his speech and stepped back, wiping his brow. The priest stepped forward again. "And now," Father Mulligan said, "before we proceed to the vows, is there anyone here who has just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony? Speak now, or forever hold your peace." It is the standard line, the dramatic pause that happens in every movie. Usually, it is met with silence. This time, The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. And then, it was broken. Not by a voice from the crowd, not by a lover running in from the rain. It was broken by the sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden stage. From the side entrance, Richard Sterling emerged. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his gray venue manager's suit, and he was holding a clipboard. He didn't look angry. He looked apologetic, professional, and absolutely lethal. He walked straight to the center of the altar, stepping between the priest and the couple. "Excuse me, Father," Richard said, his voice calm but projected clearly enough for the first 5 rows to hear. "What is the meaning of this?" Father Mulligan asked, startled, clutching his Bible. Bianca's eyes went wide. She grabbed Julian's arm. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." "Mr. Sterling," Arthur hissed, stepping forward. "What are you doing? Get off the stage. We are in the middle of a ceremony." "I am afraid I cannot do that, Mr. Winfield," Richard said. He turned to face the audience, then looked back at the family. He held up the clipboard. "As of 11 o'clock this morning," Richard said, his voice steady, "the Azure Cliffs estate has received a formal notice of sponsorship termination from the contract holder, Ms. Hazel Winfield." A gasp went through the crowd. The name Hazel rippled through the air like a gunshot. "What?" Julian squeaked. "Furthermore," Richard continued, ignoring him, "the credit card on file for the outstanding balance of $68,000 covering the venue rental. The catering staff who are currently waiting in the kitchen and the security detail has been declined. We attempted to run the backup card provided by Mr. Julian Thorne 10 minutes ago. It also declined." "Have you tried to run it now?" Julian stammered. "During the wedding. It is standard procedure when the primary sponsor withdraws, sir," Richard said coldly. "We cannot host an event of this magnitude on credit." "We will pay you," Meredith shrieked from her seat, standing up. "We will write you a check. Just let them finish." Richard looked at Meredith with a pitying expression. "Mrs. Winfield, with all due respect, our finance department has flagged your accounts due to the recent liquidation of the family trust. A check will not be sufficient." The crowd went dead silent. The phrase liquidation of the family trust hung in the air. In New England society, that was code for they are broke. "We are legally required to pause services," Richard said, checking his watch, "unless a payment of $68,422 is made via certified wire transfer within the next 10 minutes. We are contractually obligated to ask all guests to vacate the premises. The catering staff has been instructed to stand down. The food will not be served." Bianca made a sound that was half sob, half scream. She looked at the guests, 200 of her friends, family, and social rivals who were staring at her with open mouths. She looked at the fake flowers. She looked at her husband-to-be, who looked like he was about to faint. "This is Hazel," Bianca screamed, her voice cracking. "She is doing this. She is ruining my life." "Ms. Winfield is simply exercising her contractual rights," Richard said, maintaining his professional demeanor. "She paid for a service. She has withdrawn that payment. The bill is now yours." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I deeply apologize for the inconvenience. The bar is closed effective immediately. Please make your way to the exit in an orderly fashion." He stepped back, crossing his hands over his clipboard. The trap had snapped shut. Julian looked at the priest. "Father, just say the words. Marry us anyway." Father Mulligan looked uncomfortable. "Son, I can't perform a wedding if we are being evicted. It doesn't seem appropriate." "It is a wedding," Julian yelled, losing all control. "It is about love, not money." "Then you can get married in the parking lot," Richard noted dryly. "But you cannot do it here." At that exact moment, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the flight attendant placed a warm towel on my hands. "Champagne, Ms. Winfield?" she asked. I looked out the window at the endless expanse of blue. I couldn't see the chaos. I couldn't hear the screams. I couldn't see my mother fainting into the arms of a bridesmaid. Or my father frantically trying to bribe Richard with a watch that wasn't worth $500. Yes, I said, smiling at the clouds. The most expensive glass you have. I have plenty of room on my credit card. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. The kind of victory that burns a little going down, but leaves you warm for the rest of your life. Back in Newport, the illusion was over. The curtain had fallen, and the audience was finally seeing the Winfields for exactly who they were, actors on a stage they hadn't paid for. Reciting lines they didn't mean, to a crowd that was already walking away. The microphone, which had conveniently malfunctioned during my father's attempt at a speech, suddenly crackled with crystal-clear life. Richard Sterling had bypassed the rental equipment and patched directly into the estate's emergency public address system. His voice didn't just project, it commanded the salt air, cutting through the murmurs of the confused guests like a scalpel. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, his voice amplified to a volume that made the front row flinch. "I must ask for your absolute attention. The ceremony is hereby paused." The silence that followed was heavy, tangible. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a car crash, when the tires stop screeching and gravity takes over. Bianca, standing at the altar in her Vera Wang gown and her drugstore makeup, looked as if she had been slapped. She turned on her heel, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking without the aid of amplification. "Get down from there. You are the help. Get off my stage." Richard didn't flinch. He didn't even look at her. He looked past her, addressing the 200 guests sitting on the white folding chairs. He adjusted his glasses, looking every inch the reluctant executor of a grim will. "I apologize for the interruption," Richard continued, his tone devoid of emotion. "However, the Azure Cliffs estate operates under strict contractual obligations. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the primary contract holder, Ms. Hazel Winfield, has formally withdrawn her financial backing for this event." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It started in the back and rolled forward like a wave. The name Hazel was whispered from lip to lip, a sudden invocation of the ghost they had tried to exorcise. "What is he saying?" I heard Mrs. Vanderhoven whisper on the audio feed later. Hazel pulled the money. "Withdrawn," Arthur shouted, stepping toward Richard with his fists clenched. "You can't do that. The deposit is paid. You can't stop a wedding in the middle of the vows." "The deposit covered the reservation, Mr. Winfield," Richard replied, his voice booming over Arthur's protests. "It did not cover the service delivery, the catering staff, the security detail, or the balance of the venue fee. Those payments were scheduled for this morning. They were blocked." Richard paused, letting the information sink in. Then he delivered the next line, the one I had coached him on, the legal dagger that would twist in their gut. "Ms. Winfield cited Clause 14B of our service agreement," Richard announced. "The sponsor respect and access clause. This clause states that if the financial sponsor of the event is barred from the premises or denied access to the services they have purchased, the contract is immediately rendered void due to a hostile breach of terms." He looked directly at Julian. "We received a security order this morning, paid for by Mr. Julian Thorne, instructing our guards to deny entry to Miss Hazel Winfield. By issuing that order, you effectively canceled your own wedding funding." The crowd erupted. The whispers turned into shouts. People were standing up, craning their necks. "They banned Hazel," someone asked loudly, "after she paid for the venue." "That is why she isn't here," another voice chimed in. "They kicked her out." Bianca was shaking her head frantically. "No, that is a lie. She is jealous. She is trying to ruin me." Richard raised a hand, silencing the crowd with the authority of a headmaster. "The total outstanding balance for the services rendered up to this minute," Richard said, consulting his clipboard, "including the venue rental, the labor costs for the catering team standing by in the kitchen, and the security team you requested, is $68,000. He looked at my father. "Mr. Winfield, unless you can provide a valid form of payment for $68,000 right now, I am legally obligated to evict all persons from this property and contact the Newport Police Department to file a report for theft of services and fraud. The words police and fraud hit the crowd like physical blows. These were wealthy people. They feared scandal more than they feared death. Fraud. Arthur sputtered. He patted his pockets, pulling out a leather wallet. His hands were trembling so violently he dropped a credit card on the grass. I have an American Express. Run it. Run it now. We did run it, sir, Richard said gently, almost pityingly. It was declined. Your bank indicated that your assets have been frozen or liquidated. Arthur froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. He knew. At that moment, he realized the stock portfolio was gone. The safety net was gone. Richard turned to Julian. Mr. Thorne, do you have $68,000? Julian looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He looked at Bianca. He looked at his parents in the front row, who were looking back at him with horror. I am just a sales associate, Julian whispered, the truth finally leaking out. I don't have that kind of money. Hazel always paid. Hazel always paid, Richard repeated into the microphone. Indeed. And then, my mother broke. Meredith Winfield, the woman who prided herself on her composure, the woman who had taught me that emotions were for the weak, snapped. She lunged toward Richard, her face twisted into a snarl that was almost feral. You bastard, she shrieked. This is what she is doing, that ungrateful, miserable witch. She wants to kill us. She wants to humiliate us. Her scream tore through the air, raw and ugly. She is my daughter, Meredith yelled, turning to the crowd, her arms flailing. I gave birth to her, and she does this over money. She is leaving us to rot. She is a monster. The crowd recoiled. They weren't seeing a victim. They were seeing a woman unmasked. They saw the venom, the entitlement, the sheer hatred she held for the daughter who had supported her for a decade. Mrs. Winfield, Richard said, stepping back to avoid her clawing hands. I believe Miss Hazel anticipated this reaction, which is why she sent us one final instruction. Richard signaled to the technician in the booth. Behind the altar, a massive white screen had been set up. It was intended to display a slideshow of Bianca and Julian's love story during the reception. The projector hummed to life. But instead of a photo of Bianca and Julian kissing on a beach, a stark, high-contrast image appeared. It was an email. The email I had scheduled. The subject line was legible even from the back row, a gift of clarity. What is that? Bianca gasped, turning around to look at the screen. Evidence, Richard said. The slide changed. It wasn't just an email. It was a screenshot of a text message thread. The sender was labeled Mom, and the recipient was Bianca. Richard read the text aloud, though he didn't need to. It was 10 feet tall. Just let her pay the final installment for the flowers tomorrow. Then on the day of, we will have security block her at the gate. She is too proud to make a scene. We will tell everyone she's in Tokyo. Once the wedding is over, we cut her off. We don't need her negative energy once the checks are clear. A collective gasp of horror rose from the audience. It was a physical reaction, a recoil of disgust. Oh my God, a woman in the second row said, her hand covering her mouth. They planned it. The slide changed again. This time it was a transcript of the live stream from the bachelorette party. Quote from Meredith Winfield. Hazel is only good for the checkbook. Her heart is as dry as a roof tile. This wedding is about Bianca's class. We don't need Hazel dampening the mood. Quote from Bianca Winfield. I finally got out from under the shadow. She is paying for the party she isn't even invited to. The cruelty was naked. It was undeniable. There was no outshining here. There was no mental health concern. There was only cold, hard calculation. Bianca stood frozen, staring at her own words projected larger than life behind her. The white dress she wore, the dress I had paid for, suddenly looked like a costume. The plastic flowers around her looked like garbage. The illusion of the fairy tale had been incinerated, replaced by the ugly, gritty reality of their greed. This, Richard said, his voice somber, is why the funding was withdrawn. Ms. Hazel Winfield did not abandon her family. Her family conspired to defraud her. He looked at the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no wedding, there is no reception, there is only an unpaid bill. He turned back to Arthur. I am sorry, Mr. Winfield. You have 5 minutes to vacate the property before the police arrive, and I suggest you do leave, because the fraud charges Ms. Hazel's legal team has prepared are quite severe. The spell broke. The guests didn't wait for the police. They stood up, almost in unison. There was a scrapping of chairs, a rustle of silk and linen. Let's go, Mrs. Vanderhoven said loudly, glaring at my mother. This is absolutely disgraceful. I have never seen anything so tacky in my life, another guest muttered, stepping over a fallen plastic flower arrangement. People began to stream toward the exit. They didn't look at Bianca. They didn't offer condolences. They looked at the Winfields with the one thing my family feared more than anything else: contempt. My mother stood in the middle of the aisle, watching her social standing evaporate. Wait, she cried out, reaching for the arm of a passing senator's wife. Joyce, please. It is a misunderstanding. Hazel hacked my phone. It is fake. Joyce pulled her arm away as if Meredith were contagious. Don't touch me, Meredith. You are a grifter, and to do that to your own daughter, you are sick. Bianca collapsed on the altar steps. She didn't faint this time. She sat down hard, burying her face in her hands. Julian stood over her, useless, looking at his parents who were already walking toward the parking lot without looking back. Julian, Bianca sobbed. Do something. Do what? Julian snapped, his voice cracking. It is over, Bianca. Everyone saw it. Everyone knows. He ripped the boutonniere. A sad, wilting silk rose off his lapel and threw it on the ground. $68,000. You told me she would pay. You said she was a doormat. She was supposed to be, Bianca screamed back. Well, she isn't, Julian yelled. And now I am going to be arrested for theft of services because I signed the security contract. The guests were filing out faster now, a river of judgment flowing away from the wreckage. Richard Sterling stood on the stage, watching them go, his face impassive. He checked his watch. 3 minutes. Mr. Winfield, Richard called out. My father stood alone near the front row. He looked at the empty chairs. He looked at the retreating backs of his friends. He looked at the screen, where the text message about cutting her off was still glowing brightly. He looked up at the camera, the security camera. He knew I was gone. He knew I wasn't watching live, but he knew that I would see this. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked defeated, a small, broken man in a rented tuxedo that he couldn't afford to dry clean. I sat in my first-class seat, 30,000 feet in the air, imagining this moment. I imagined the heat of the sun, the smell of the plastic flowers, and the sound of the truth finally being spoken. They had wanted a wedding that would be the talk of the town. They got their wish. The Winfield wedding would be talked about for decades, not for its beauty, not for its elegance, but for the spectacular, satisfying crash of a family that thought they could build a castle on a foundation of lies. The truth was naked, and it was ugly, but from where I sat, sipping champagne and watching the clouds roll by, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The wedding did not end with a kiss. It ended with the sound of a plastic flower arrangement being kicked across a limestone floor. The guests had fled the scene with the speed of rats sensing a rising tide. Within 15 minutes of Richard Sterling's announcement, the lawn of the Azure Cliffs estate was deserted. Save for rows of empty white chairs that looked like teeth in a gaping, mocking mouth, the ocean breeze, once a romantic accent to the day, now whipped through the abandoned venue, knocking over the flimsy ceremony arch and scattering the synthetic petals of the violet sunrise across the grass like confetti at a funeral. Bianca was no longer standing at the altar. She had collapsed onto the stone steps, her legs splayed out in a posture of total defeat. The $12,000 Vera Wang gown, the one tangible object of value in this entire charade, was now stained with grass and dirt. She wasn't crying the delicate, tragic tears of a heroine in a romance novel. She was heaving, ugly, guttural sobs that shook her entire frame. But as I watched the footage later, I realized something important. She wasn't crying because she had lost her sister. She wasn't even crying because she had lost her groom. She was crying because she had lost her audience. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing her into the ground. She had wanted to be the envy of Newport, and instead, she had become its punchline. Julian stood a few feet away, stripping off his jacket. He looked at Bianca not with sympathy, but with repulsion. The illusion of wealth, the golden haze that I had paid to maintain around the Winfield name had evaporated, leaving only the stark reality of debt and deception. Julian was a man who liked shiny things, and Bianca had just lost her shine. "I can't believe this," Julian muttered, pacing back and forth, running a hand through his gelled hair. "My parents left. My boss was here. Bianca, my boss saw that email on the screen. Do you know what that does to me?" "To you," Bianca screamed, looking up, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. "What about me? This was my day. She ruined my day." "Your sister didn't ruin it," Julian snapped, his voice cold. "You did. You and your mother. You told me she was on board. You told me the money was secured. You lied." "I did it for us," Bianca wailed. "No." Julian shook his head, backing away. "You did it for yourself. And now I am liable for $68,000. I don't think so." He turned to his best man, the only other person who had lingered, mainly because he was waiting for an Uber. "Let's go." "Julian." Bianca scrambled to her feet, tripping on the hem of her dress. "Where are you going? We have to fix this. We can go to the courthouse on Monday. We can explain to people that it was a hacking incident." Julian laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Courthouse, Bianca. Look around. There is no wedding. There is no marriage. I am not marrying into a family that gets evicted from their own ceremony for fraud. My mother would disown me. It is over." "You can't leave me," she shrieked, grabbing his arm. He shook her off with a violent jerk. "Don't touch me. I'm going to call my lawyer. If anyone asks, I was a victim of your scam, just like the venue." He walked away. He walked down the long gravel driveway, past the security guards who were now watching the scene with folded arms, and got into his friend's car. He didn't look back once. Bianca stood alone in the center of the ruins. She let out a scream of pure, impotent rage, grabbed a heavy glass vase from a nearby table, one of the few real items the venue had provided, and hurled it at a waiter who was collecting the abandoned programs. The vase shattered against a pillar, sending shards of glass flying. "Get out!" she screamed at the staff. "Everyone get out!" Richard Sterling didn't flinch. He simply tapped his earpiece. "Security to the main lawn. We have a guest becoming violent. And call the Newport Police Department. We have property damage and an assault on a staff member." The police arrived 10 minutes later. My parents, Arthur and Meredith, were standing near the catering tent, surrounded by 3 large security guards. They weren't being arrested. Not yet. But they were being detained. Richard Sterling was presenting them with a document. "Mr. Winfield," Richard said, his voice carrying over the wind, "since you cannot pay the balance, you are required to sign this admission of debt. It places a lien on your primary residence in Boston until the $68,000, plus legal fees and the cancellation penalty, is paid in full." "A lien," Arthur sputtered, wiping sweat from his gray face. "You can't take my house." "You took my services," Richard replied calmly. "This is standard procedure. Sign it, or we press criminal charges for theft right now. The officers are walking up the driveway as we speak." Arthur looked at the approaching police cruiser, its blue lights flashing against the bright afternoon sun. He looked at Meredith, who was sitting on a cooler, staring blankly at the ground, mumbling to herself. He looked at his daughter, who was currently being restrained by a female officer after trying to scratch the face of a security guard. Arthur signed. His hand shook so badly the pen tore through the paper. The police didn't arrest Arthur or Meredith, but they did put Bianca in the back of the cruiser, Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, public intoxication. It wasn't a felony, but it was a mugshot. And in the world of the Winfields, a mugshot was a death sentence. As the cruiser pulled away, carrying the weeping bride, a young waiter pulled out his phone. He snapped a picture of the empty chairs, the overturned arch, and the police car. He posted it to Twitter. The hashtag, the Winfield wedding disaster began to trend locally within the hour. By evening, it had picked up traction on TikTok. Strangers were dissecting the email screenshots. People were making memes of the plastic flowers. The internet, in its cruel and efficient justice, was doing what I had refused to do. It was destroying their reputation globally. While my family was imploding in real time, I was landing in another world. The seaplane touched down on the turquoise water of the Maldives just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was a bruised purple and gold, reflecting off the Indian Ocean. I stepped onto the wooden dock, the warm, humid air wrapping around me like a blanket. It smelled of salt, coconut, and absolute freedom. I walked to my overwater villa. It was a palace of isolation, glass floors, a private infinity pool, and silence. No chaotic family group chats, no demands for money, no guilt trips. I sat on the edge of the deck, dangling my feet over the water. I ordered a bottle of champagne from room service. Then, I took a deep breath and turned my phone on. It vibrated instantly. It kept vibrating for a full 2 minutes. 37 missed calls from Mom, 22 missed calls from Dad, 15 missed calls from Julian, 12 missed calls from Bianca before her phone was presumably taken by the police, and hundreds of text messages. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to hear my father's blustering threats or Julian's whining excuses. I scrolled through the texts. Most were abusive. Arthur, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You have humiliated this family. Julian, fix this. Hazel, wire the money right now or I swear to God I will sue you, Aunt Carol. How could you be so cruel? Your mother is fainting. But then, as the hours passed, the tone shifted. Desperation set in. Arthur, Hazel, please. The police are here. They are making me sign a lien on the house. We need cash. Just transfer $20,000. We can talk about the rest later. Meredith, pick up the phone. Bianca is in jail. We need bail money. I scrolled to the very last message. It was from my mother, sent 10 minutes ago. Meredith, you have destroyed everything. You are not my daughter. I looked at the words. They were meant to be a knife in the heart. They were meant to make me crumble, to make me call back weeping and begging for forgiveness, promising to fix it all if they would just love me again. But the knife didn't cut. The wound had already scarred over years ago. I typed my reply. It was the only message I would send. Hazel, I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped paying for the stage I wasn't allowed to perform on. The price of vanity is self-respect, and today you bankrupt both. Goodbye. I hit send. I watched the status change to delivered, then read. I didn't wait for the bubbles to appear, indicating a response. I opened the back of my phone case. I used the small metal tool I kept on my keychain to pop open the SIM card tray. I took out the small chip, the tiny piece of silicon that connected me to the world of the Winfields, to the demands, to the ATM nickname, to the gray dress, to the lifetime of being the secondary character in my own life. I held it up to the dying light of the sun, then I snapped it in half. I tossed the pieces into the ocean. They hit the water with a tiny, insignificant splash and sank immediately into the deep blue. I stood up. I walked back into the villa, leaving the phone on the table. The champagne arrived. The waiter poured a glass, the bubbles rising in a golden chain. Is there anything else I can get for you, Ms. Winfield? He asked politely. No, I said, taking the glass. I walked out to the deck and looked at the horizon, where the sky met the sea in a perfect, unbroken line. Actually, yes. Do you have a spa menu? I suddenly have a lot of free time. Of course, madam. He left. I was alone. But for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't lonely. I felt a lightness in my chest, a physical sensation of weight being lifted. I wasn't the dutiful daughter anymore. I wasn't the wallet. I wasn't the shadow. I was Hazel Winfield. I was an architect of dreams, and I had just demolished a condemned building to make room for something new. I took a sip of champagne. It was cold, crisp, and tasted exactly like the future. My sister didn't invite me to her wedding because she didn't want me to outshine the bride. She got her wish. I didn't outshine her. I simply turned off the lights and let the darkness show everyone who she really was. And in that darkness, I finally found my own light. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or maybe even a tropical beach like Hazel? Please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts on Hazel's revenge. Was it too harsh, or exactly what they deserved? Don't forget to subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is simply closing your wallet and living your life. Stay strong, and see you in the next story.